the geographical edge of the country at the center of one of its biggest issues: immigration.
Under my administration,
Politicians yell about it.
will be detained.
People want answers to it. So this week, we've come to the border. We're in the area around El Paso, Texas. Where I'm standing right now, this is the United States. And right on the other side of this fence, that's Mexico. What do the people who live here on the literal front line of the issue think? This week, we're across the country looking at immigration's impact from several viewpoints. This show isn't about dividing, it's about getting you the facts so you make a smart decision November 6th. This is The Race. Welcome into The Race. I'm Chris Stewart, and this week we are tackling a very important issue in this country, and that is immigration. It is a hot topic, so many opinions about it, and that's why we're right now, just about a half hour outside of El Paso, Texas. And you can see we're literally on the wall right now, the border between the United States and Mexico, this fence separating the two countries. And this part of the country, it is getting a lot of attention recently, this part of Texas, because not far from where I'm standing right now, there's a government facility where they're not allowing cameras, but there is a growing tent city of migrant children. Now, we requested to go inside, but the government said no. They did give us this video that the Department of Health and Human Services released of a tour inside. This was back in June. Right now, we know around 1,600 minors are here. The government dealing with an increasing amount of minors crossing the border, many of them alone and from Central America. That's why this facility is expected to stay open until at least the end of this year. Now, the government says this is not related to the family separation issue that we saw earlier this year. Many of these children, these minors, they were first sent to private shelters or foster homes across the country. They're going to be here until they're placed with a sponsor. HHS tells us that the children could be here for around 20 days, but that isn't set in stone. Now, the New York Times reported many of these children were moved here in the middle of the night so they wouldn't try to escape. HHS tells us that's not true. They did say the minors only get a couple hours notice before they're moved. The Times also raised concern about a lack of education and legal resources. HHS denying that too, saying they have 24-hour access to legal reps and the children get education in a class setting. Now, how good are those resources? Well, it's hard to tell because they're not letting anyone's cameras inside, but wherever the truth lies, at the end of the day, it just shows some of the challenges that this country faces when it comes to immigration issues. The community here in this part of Texas is very aware of the challenges that come with the American-Mexican border and plans to build a wall. In El Paso, this barrier wall is an example of that. And construction just started to replace this fence you see right here that just runs along the edge of a historic part of town. We're in El Paso here. Right across the way is Juarez, Mexico. A 4-mile stretch of fencing will turn into an 18-foot high barrier made with steel posts called bollards. Now, this is part of the $1.6 billion in a spending bill the president signed in March, designed to improve and replace existing border fencing. It's separate from the president's campaign promise to build a wall along our border with Mexico.
And ultimately, we have to have the wall.
Around this time last year, we got our first look at 8 prototypes for that new wall as they were going up. They stood in San Diego, each one constructed a little differently, each one 30 feet tall. Now, some are see-through, some are not. The president checked each one out in March of this year, but so far, it's not clear which one will be selected or when or who will pay for it. For now, the focus is on improving what's already there because that's the work that's being funded. 700 miles of fencing along a 2,000-mile border with tough terrain and the Rio Grande River serving as barriers on the U.S.-Mexico border where a fence doesn't. And from the wall to dreamers, Republicans and Democrats, they have focused their efforts on different issues when it comes to immigration. Corey Rangel talking to both about where they stand so you can make an informed decision come November.
Republicans have made border security a top immigration priority. Despite objections from Democrats, Congress passed a spending bill this year that included more than $1 billion for new border fencing and related technology.
In terms of immigration, I think it's hard to argue that the president has not made the country more secure. He's been a strong proponent of increasing our border security. He's led on the issue. He's gotten Congress to help appropriate more funding for border security and for increased interior enforcement as well.
Republicans have promised to ask for even more money after the midterms. The president also enacted new policies that led to a record number of immigrant children being held at detention centers across the country. The president later signed an executive order to keep families together, but Democrats have called the separation policies inhumane.
We don't believe in breaking families up. We don't believe in marginalizing people, but I think there's an opportunity to have a discussion to figure out what's the best way for immigration. So I think right now, we've seen this election cycle, images, of families, being torn apart, seeing images of how this particular administration and their policies are affecting families.
Meanwhile, Democrats continue to fight for protections for dreamers, those immigrants brought to the U.S. as children who never became citizens.
With the DREAM Act, this was a wonderful opportunity, to have those citizens come here and be a part of our education system, to be a part of our working class, be a part of the jobs, to help to build this economy.
We have to secure the border first before we can start to address the second problem, which is dealing with people who are already in the country who don't have legal status. So I don't think you can separate either one of those. They should be dealt with in a comprehensive way.
For The Race, I'm Corey Rangel.
Well, during his campaign, the president promised to remove all immigrants who came here illegally. Annie Taylor fact-checking those deportations and comparing them to the previous administration.
U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which we all know as ICE, compiles its data on deportations based on the fiscal year. So some of it overlaps administrations, but in crunching the numbers, PolitiFact found ICE deportations are actually down. Back in the fiscal year 2012, ICE deported more than 400,000 immigrants living here illegally. Fast forward to fiscal year 2017, which overlapped the Obama and Trump administrations, ICE deportations were down to around 225,000 and down under 200,000 for this year so far. PolitiFact found several possible reasons for the recent drop. At the beginning of the Trump presidency, there was a brief slowdown in the number of immigrants crossing the border illegally, dubbed the Trump effect. And later, as more cities adopted sanctuary policies, there was less cooperation with ICE away from the border. I'm Annie Taylor for The Race.
Now, wherever you are in the country, people have a different opinion when it comes to immigration. But let's face it, if you live here on the literal front line, things are a little bit different. We're in a neighborhood right now. That's the border right there. You see that fence. So coming up next on The Race, we're going to be talking to this community about their opinions on an issue they live so closely to.